Hello and welcome to Off the Shelf Reviews.
I'm going down in a blaze of glory.
And I'm Gary. And today we're going to review and discuss Posse, starring and directed by Mario Van Peebles in 1993. Ian, why don't you give us the synopsis?
Well, the story follows Jesse Lee, played by Mario Van Peebles, who is part of the American Army and decides that, screw this, I'm not going to go on a suicide mission for my evil commander Billy Zane. I'm going to leave and steal all the gold that he wants. Jesse decides to head back to his old town and along the way melts down all of the gold that he's stolen into bullets so that he can use these golden bullets to kill the demon men who lynched his father many years before.
Mario Van Peebles is kind of an interesting actor, and as I've come to realise, also somewhat interesting director.
Yes.
His first directorial movie, New Jack City, with Wesley Snipes, was kind of like the black version of Scarface,
Yes.
in a way.
Yeah.
But it was stylistically well done, and it was very well performed, and everything about it really clicked. And I was like, okay, Mario Van Peebles, you've kind of survived the shark attack from the Jaws of the Revenge and kind of redeemed yourself, even though I always found that he was one of my favourite parts about that film.
Yeah.
But I never really seen him in that much else. He was kind of a guilty pleasure for me in Gunmen with Christopher Lambert.
Right.
I also really liked him in Full Eclipse, which was a kind of werewolf film, and that was directed by Anthony Hickox, who you remember from the Hellraiser films.
Oh, God, yes.
So Mario Van Peebles, he had something to say when he wanted to direct Posse.
Yes.
And it was kind of striked me at the very beginning of this film when there's a narration that explains to you that there were black cowboys. And I'll be completely honest. I went, well, shit, of course there would have been. Like, well, how come I didn't find out about this in history books or in any other films I've really seen other than perhaps some of Tarantino's modern movies?
Yeah.
But you look back and you remember Clint Eastwood and all of the other greats from that sort of Western era of filmmaking. And there was really no black cowboys.
Well, unless you count Blazing Saddles.
Yeah.
Look what I got here. Hey, where are the white women at?
But this is it. Like you said, the narration starts at the beginning, and you sit there going, "Oh crap! Yeah, a lot of this stuff is hidden behind the racial hatred that was going around that time." We're not just talking black cowboys. There would have been Chinese men coming over to build the railroads. They would have gone off. You had the Indians going off to do their thing. And if you look back on history, it's kind of like, well, America was discovered, and the white man came along and found it. But I think it's somebody actually says it during the film, doesn't it? Where the guy says, "Oh, that's like me coming along and saying, I've discovered your car. You're sat in your car, so I've discovered it. Now I get to take it from you." We're not going to go into the racial history of America, but the white man wasn't really the savior at that time.
No, even though the history books and Hollywood films would have you believe otherwise.
Yeah.
And I'd never seen this film before, so going into it, it was kind of a mystery. And so having that revelation at the beginning, it made me go, okay, so this should be an interesting story. You're going to tell this untold story.
Yeah.
And almost immediately, you're looking at it and you're just thinking that the budget's not there.
Yeah.
You've got, from what I've seen from the opening credits, a pretty large ensemble cast, but the rest of it just starts falling short when we start hitting these cliches. But Billy Zane turns up, and almost immediately I'm sat poised, ready for another crazy performance.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember seeing this film years ago on TCN, Turner Classic Movies on Sky, and this film kind of owns that spot because it's not a good Western. I mean, I could name the top 5 good Westerns on in one hand. You've got your Once Upon a Time in the West. You've got your Fistful of Dollars 2, and the Good, Bad, and the Ugly. Pretty much any film with Clint Eastwood in playing, an unnamed gunman shooting people down. Those are your good Westerns. Mario Van Peebles comes along and says, right, okay, I've got this tiny, tiny little budget, but I want to tell this story. And so what you are left with is over-the-top acting, low-budget sets, cheesy cliches, but for some reason, I wouldn't say it works. I'd say it keeps the film going so that you can get to the end. You know, when you sit down to watch this film and you see Mario Van Peebles on the front of it, if you're not experienced with Mario Van Peebles films, you're going to sit there thinking, oh God, what the hell am I watching? But if you are, you know that just like Wesley Snipes and Jean-Claude Van Damme, they knock out a load of these films one after the other, and it's kind of like the same storyline. They're the hero. You know, the fact that Mario Van Peebles is directing this film and is the main star tells you already that Jesse Lee is too cool for old school. I haven't even got into the film yet, but fucking hell.
You're so right, but at least when he's on screen, I'm just looking at it and I'm like, wow, you actually look like a goddamn badass.
Yes.
The cowboy hat that he's wearing, I don't know the exact name for it, but just the lighting on him, where it's just showing his eyes.
Yeah.
He looks cool and badass, but too much so.
Too much so, yeah.
You gonna shoot? Shoot. Save the bluffing for the card game, gambler.
I mean, we start off, he's part of the American Army. You know, Billy Zane is his commander, and his Jesse Lee is in charge of the 10th, which is the black unit. And like we said, with the racial tension, it's basically like get behind the darkies from South Park, throw them at the enemy until the enemy's out of bullets, then we'll go in and claim all the victory. But Jesse Lee's smarter than, you know, everybody else, and it's like, actually, I don't want to risk the lives of my men doing that. Fuck that, we're not doing it. Until Billy Zane, you know, has this crazy ass moment where he's like, okay, fine, okay, let's get some prisoners out, right? Do you want to be in charge? No, you want to leave? Bang, right, you're dead. Okay, Stephen Baldwin, do you want to be in charge? And Stephen Baldwin's like, yeah, okay. I don't want to get shot. And you're like, oh, nice, Billy Zane. You know, we've got the villain already. Billy Zane's the villain.
Jesse, did you know that this man is the last surviving member of the Motisa tribe? Yes, the Motisa tribe. I'll show you.
Motisa?
No, thank you.
He sends Jesse Lee and the crew off to steal some gold from some Cubans.
From the Spanish convoy, I think.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, so we've now established that we've got these deserters who are now going on a suicide mission. So I was like, great, we've got a Western suicide squad. This is what the film is about. And within seconds, they're doing this raid on the Spanish convoy straight away. I was like, oh, whoa, okay, I didn't know. I haven't really established who the rest of this posse are.
Yeah.
And so when characters are wandering around during this raid, I'm just like, I don't know who any of you are, so I don't really care. Oh, actually, some of these characters are dying. I guess it really was a suicidal raid.
Yeah.
But then they get the gold and they escape, and they're like, wow, we've got the gold. And we were sent here to war die, and I think we had one casualty. Well, that's not too bad. But then crazy Colonel Graham turns up, and he's just like, well, I guess I have my excuse now to gun you all down and take the Spanish gold.
Yeah.
This has all happened within like 15 minutes. I was like, that's a whole film just happened.
just done, you know. Jesse Lee shoots the colonel in the eye. They end up blasting most of the men and watch them all run off. And you're like, okay, right, so a couple more people have died, but we didn't really know who they were.
No.
And Jesse Lee's turning around to the survivors and he's like, well, I'm going home. Do you know, the rest of them are like, well, we want to come with you because, well, if we don't, we're not going to be in the rest of this film.
Yeah.
You know? So Jesse Lee's like, yeah, okay then, come with me. And you get from this point, you get some really cool conversational pieces now. You learn a few of the characters' names. You've got like Tone Lock playing Angel, and I remember mainly Tone Lock as the gravel-voiced detective from Ace Ventura with Jim Carrey. You've also got a Bobo, played by Tiny Lister. Now, everybody should at least recognise this guy from at least one film. If you haven't, it's No Holds Barred with Hulk Hogan. You know, it's Friday with Ice Cube. And he was that prisoner who threw the bomb out the window in The Dark Knight. So, you know, Tiny Lister has got a wide range of films that he's been in. Like you said, you've got Mario Van Peebles as Jesse Lee. And then you've got Stephen Baldwin with Little J.
He's kind of like, he's the one white person in this group.
Yeah. And but he fits in very well, because I've always liked Stephen Baldwin as this. I've always liked the Baldwins. They do, some of them do very good acting. But Stephen Baldwin always does crazy really, really well. You know, he's doing it well in this. He does it very well in The Usual Suspects. And I'll always like him from Biodome with Pauly Shore, you know? So you're sat there like, wow, this film's got a lot of guilty pleasure actors. I'm just going to keep going with it. But the thing I find is, as the film goes on, I get really bored. Because Mario Van Peebles is kind of trying to tell this historical story about black cowboys and how Hollywood has shunned them, which is fine. But then he ticks off every single cliche that you've seen in every single film before. Montages up the fucking ass.
Now, I will be honest, in the first couple of montages I was like, okay, you know, natural landscape of America is breathtaking, and some of the cinematography captures it. But too much. Again.
Yes.
Where we just keep, like, after like the third montage, I closed my eyes and I drifted off, because at this point the film wore me out. I got fed up with it.
Yeah.
But getting towards the end of the film, I kind of got reinvested into it again. But you're right, at that midsection, the film just sags completely. It loses direction, and it kind of fishtails between over stylized Western setting and trying to tell the story about the KKK, the story about racial tension, the story about blacks not being in poverty, and all of these other things. At the same time, is trying to establish this posse of what was 7 down to about 5 or 4 characters, not including Jesse. And you're just like, what is this film about?
Yeah, that's what I did. After a while, I'm just like, okay, so he's left Colonel Graham stealing the gold. Colonel Graham's alive and he's chasing after Jesse Lee. Jesse Lee has now melted down the gold into bullets, and it started killing blacks. The blacksmith is the first guy he kills, because he was part of the lynch mob that killed Jesse Lee's dad, which in turn got Jesse Lee put in jail to the army because Jesse Lee killed one of the lynch mob.
Well, that's the thing, is that we don't just have montages, but we also have flashbacks.
Oh, God,
and it was also the flashbacks which really neutered the film for me, because they didn't work. They just, you know, stylistically it was all almost in slow-mo. It was almost, or it was sped up, or it was the sepia color. It was like, you know, this is a flashback because it looks different. But it was just felt so hammy and so out of place, and meh.
It's crazy. It's crazy we say that though, because it's not something to hate on for the film. Like I said, if you're prepared for a Mario Van Peebles, you know, directed movie, you know it's not exactly going to be a James Cameron Oscar-winning piece, but you've got to give credit to Mario Van Peebles. The fact that he does what a lot of, you know, starring actors do, is that they star in the scene, then they'll go back and watch it and be like, yeah, that works. Now we'll put the camera on these guys. Because when Jesse Lee's not in the scenes, it kind of gives, you know, Tiny Lister, Tone Loc, Stephen Baldwin, Charles Lane as Wheezy, it gives them all time to show off some acting. So you start getting invested in their characters, so that later on in the film, when things start to happen, you actually do generally start to feel bad.
The other side. I'm not big. I'm just trying to double my flesh.
Angel! Oh, man! Angel! Let's get out of here!
What you ought to do is put that milk down and go on to get you some of that liquor and come on over here and get you one of these pretty things before you end up with that ding-a-ling.
They go from Cuba to New Orleans, and Jesse gives them all a bunch of money from the gold, and they all decide to go out and get drunk and play cards. So you're like, right, okay, so now we've just jumped from Cuba to New Orleans. Is this where the film starts? No, we're just going to have a little adventure here. You know, Little J, who is a fucking phenomenal cards player, has now met up with Father Time. I liked the relationship that these two had going, because it was separate to the Jesse Lee storyline. You knew Jesse Lee was the main hero and he was going to get the bad guy at the end. But establishing, Little J and Father Time, you're like, oh, I'd like to follow these two now. Because Little J's on at him. I want to be your partner. We should be partners. We can con people. And Father Time's like, I'm too cool for that. I've got my watch. I've got my gun. Nobody fucks with me. But I'll hang with you, Little J, because you're a cool little dude. And you're like, oh, okay. A Bobo and Wheezy. A Bobo can't read and is very childlike. Wheezy is... He's... I wouldn't say corrupt. He can blackmail people to convince them, look, I'm actually the leader of this posse. But who's Jesse? Oh, he works for me. And you're like, oh, all these characters now in the posse have a background, so I can get behind it. Though.
Well, they have their mannerisms, which makes them identifiable.
Yeah.
But you don't really get to find out too much about them, and too many of the scenes focus just on the Jesse character, which is why when you have those other moments with the other characters, that's when it starts to feel more like an ensemble cast, and that's when you go, there's quite a variety of characters here, but you don't get to spend enough time with them to care enough when some of them die.
Yeah.
And that is a bonus that I do like about the film, is that in the shootouts, there are casualties on both sides, near enough, and the posse does get whittled down, and I appreciated that.
Yeah. I mean, they go from New Orleans to the Western frontiers, and like we said, this is where the second montage will kick in, where we're following a train, and we're following the guys on horseback. Then we're following the train again. Then we're following the guys on horseback. And then they finally get to Freemanville. And it was the black town that Jesse's dad had or wanted to establish so that everyone could get an education. The film was weak up to this point because you're like, right, okay, so like I said, he's being chased by the colonel. He's got the gold. He's melted the gold down into bullets. He's now come back to avenge his father's death while the colonel is still chasing him. The colonel has now gone to Cutterstown, which is just down the road from Freemanville, which is a full-on white town with lynch mob and KKK hangings and all that kind of stuff. And so you're like, so who is the fucking bad guy? Is it Billy Zane or is it the KKK member? Oh, well, Jesse's so cool, he needs two bad guys.
Or is it the black town accountant that's thieving all the property or the deeds from everyone that's living there?
Yeah.
So I'm like, so there's now 3 villains?
Jesse needs 3 villains. It's like...
Ku Klux Klan's heads. Looky, let's shoot a couple for old time's sake.
That's kind of big for targets, ain't it?
Not if you shoot them in the nuts like I do.
Jesse gets to his hometown, meets up with his old Indian sweetheart, and she's like, well, somebody else has asked me to marry me. And you sit there and you're looking at Varial Van Peebles and you're like, bitch, you really going to turn that down? That's Jesse Lee.
She does. She leaves him as, in the silhouette. See ya.
Yeah, but then they meet up again at the waterfall and she just kind of kicks him into the water and gives him that whole speech of, you're too busy thinking about dying, Jesse.
But it was like half an hour ago, we just had a scene of all of the posse frolicking around in the water.
Oh,
in the
God,
pool.
the bath sequence.
So so then like 20 minutes, half an hour later, when they're in the water again, I was just like, come on. Like,
You walk this motherfucker, look at that! 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 Look at his dick! You
it was the worst part, this love story. Of all the things that was going on, shoehorning in this love story was just horrible.
Because I don't know about, I can probably speak for myself, I don't know about Gary, but we just knew Jesse Lee was going to get her.
Yeah,
we just knew.
was...
we just knew. You might as well just call this movie The Legend of Jesse Lee, because that's what it was.
Well, it's kind of interesting in a sense that so many Western films that we know and remember, all most of them have their origins as being historically black people.
Yeah.
One of the most celebrated or the most well known is perhaps the Lone Ranger. because
Right.
it was, televised, had its own show.
Yeah.
But that source material, the original Lone Ranger, was an African American man.
Oh, right. Awesome.
And this has happened a lot where Hollywood has looked at the history and gone, that was a great character. Shame he was a black person. We'll cast a white person and tell the story this way.
Yeah.
And that happened time and time and time again. So again, it's kind of interesting that we have an original story that's now actually being played by a black African American actor.
Yeah.
So
You boys are gonna get a fair trial, as God is my witness.
Your witness, Mayor, is that the same God that witnessed you all putting black folks into slavery and stealing the Indians' land?
Papa Joe, you ought to be working on saving your black soul.
Shit. I'm working on saving my black ass.
But they finally make it to the town, like I said, and the sheriff from Cutter's Town has turned up with his lynch mob, and they start beating on the members of the posse looking for Jesse Lee. Stephen Baldwin has a cool little moment here because he sacrifices himself to stop his friends from getting beaten on. And the lynch mob drag him outside and beat him to death. Now, it was a good moment because it gave Jesse Lee the reason then. Jesse Lee has now turned up, and all the black members of Freemanville have seen that this white man is willing on risking his life for everybody else. And so it breaks the racial tension now where people are like, actually, those ones in the white sheets are the bad guys. These guys are actually nice, and so now he's being killed. We're actually going to avenge his death. But you swing it back, well, fucking... You've been following Stephen Baldwin trying to build up this relationship with Father Time for fucking ages. And then when he's getting the shit kicked out of him, Father Time is literally just sat at the table in the bar. And I'm like, okay, he explains it later on by saying there's no odds in me coming out to save him. But I'm like, you could have just started fucking blasting people with your gun. You didn't even try. Well, they would have come back and burned the town to the ground. They're planning on burning the town to the ground anyway. At least they'd be dead. But obviously, like we said, it's the story of Jesse Lee.
I mean, Jesse Lee didn't really need his friend dying, whether he considered any of his posse his friends anyway.
Yeah.
Because as we saw in the flashbacks, he was already motivated because every time he kills one of these people that we keep getting the jumps of flashback to, he's already on a revenge mission anyway.
Yeah.
So he's already targeting these people. He's actually brought his posse to his hometown so that he can gun down these people which did these things to him. Why is he taking so long to decide now I'm going to come back? Was it because he's been in the war so long?
Yeah, I don't, this is it. I've only just thought about this now. Was he already planning on coming back to avenge his father at the beginning of the film? We just weren't told.
I guess so.
But he just happened to... This is, like I said, this is how cliche it is. If he was planning on going back to revenge his father's death and he needed the gold bullets, it's just goddamn coincidence that he was sent on a mission to steal the gold in the first place, get away with it, melt it down with the very blacksmith who lynched his dad so he could shoot him with it, and then turn up back into town with the gold bullets. I love the fact that after Stephen Baldwin has died, the sheriff of Freemanville comes up to Jesse Lee and says to him, "Don't do anything crazy now, Jesse Lee."
Jesse, don't you go do nothing crazy. This here's a peaceful town.
This here ain't peaceful.
And you just sounded like, well, of course he fucking is. He's just had sex. Oh, God, the sex scene. Sorry. I totally forgot about the sex scene. If you want cheesy 90s sex scene, this is it.
It's in there just to fill the box.
Yeah.
Just to say, yep, we have all of the elements that should be in.
Yeah, rubbing the gun between the boobs, she wearing the hat, making the weird noises. Anyway, yep, stay off the sex scene.
Terrible scene.
Yes. The lynch mob return to Freemanville, and the residents of Freemanville decide to fight back. You've got Al Powell, who's obviously decided to quit his job in LA and not work with John McClane anymore.
And he's now a barber.
And you've got Chef, or Chef's great-great-great-great-grandfather. working in Fremantle. So everybody's got a gun. They're fighting the lynch mob. Lo and behold, the Colonel turns up with a Gatling gun. And I like the idea of the Gatling gun, but it was badly filmed because this thing was firing slower and slower, it seemed, in every scene. And yet you're watching, when they're aiming at people like Jesse Lee or a Bobo or other people like that, they're able to dodge out the way of the bullets. Not normal residents, no. Normal residents are obviously killed off to give the impact of it. And it just turns into a mad fucking crazy shootout with twists and turns and betrayals and backstabbery and fucking explosions and crazy shit and slow motion rides at Gatling cannons and dynamite and Billy Zane with a crazy eye patch that keeps moving.
See, that all sounds great, but it's not. It's just like I'm just watching this now just to see how it ends. Because I just wanted it. I kind of just wanted it over.
Did you guess how it was going to end?
I did not guess how it was going to end.
Really?
No. Well, I can kind of guess who was going to live.
Yeah.
And who was going to die. But I really enjoyed the Billy Zane, Mario Van Peebles showdown.
Yes.
As the building's burning down, they're shooting at each other. The moment when they both turn to shoot and they're both out of bullets.
Yeah.
I love the setup where Billy Zane's just firing or attempting to shoot the girl that he's got prisoner, and he's just Russian rouletting it. There's just some nice little crazy moments in there, but as a whole, it doesn't work. Just the whole finale, the guns flying, everything exploding. It's just okay.
Yeah.
But I wasn't invested at this point anymore. I wasn't drawn in, and I was just kind of glad that it was reaching its finish.
Yeah, because when you have a big final fight sequence, if you have too many edges towards the final fight loses a lot of appeal.
There just wasn't enough setup.
Yeah.
There was the moment where Jesse's just like, they're gonna come, this town will be destroyed essentially if you don't take up arms and defend yourselves, and everyone's like, we ain't got the guns, we don't have the numbers, blah 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 blah. So it's like, okay. And then the mob turn up and it's like, defend ourselves.
Yeah.
It was like, what happened? Like, there was no real setup. There was no case of, okay, we're gonna have this positioning, these strategies. This is how we're gonna defeat them. It was just a case of, shit, the train's here and here they come.
Yeah, they're here now. We're gonna have this big fight. Like I said, the sheriff of Fremantle decides that he's gonna leave with all the deeds of everybody's lands because he's being the corrupt guy from the beginning. I don't know. But then he's killed by the sheriff of Cutterstown. The sheriff of Cutterstown is killed by Jesse. Jesse then has to rush all the way over to the other side of town to meet up with Billy Zane because Billy Zane is the big evil. It's crazy.
I still have some memorable moments in the film, and as you said earlier, the gambling scene with Father Time and little Jay Teeters. I liked that scene because I liked being introduced to all of the gamblers at the table.
Yes.
I really liked the brothel setting, and I just thought it felt very ambient, very atmospheric, and the tension of them playing the cards and Little John realising that Father Time is a cheat, holding the aces in his hand all the time while he's doing all of his card shuffling tricks. I really liked that moment, and as you said, those two characters shined at that point, and the chemistry between them would continue. There was another couple of moments that I liked with the Father Time character. I think he was one of my favourite characters in the film.
Right.
And I like it when Jesse teaches him a lesson about not just talking to the person you're going to shoot. If you're going to aim your gun at them, make sure you intend to shoot them.
Yeah.
And Father Time sort of takes this lesson on board, kind of, because it's also his downfall when he's got the gun at someone, decides not to shoot them, and he pays the price for it.
Yeah.
So, there's a couple of moments in the film that I like. The cinematography is really good. However, the cameraman just could not keep still, and just the camera just goes all over the place. And I was like, some of it works, some of it doesn't, and that's the case for a lot of this film and a lot of the scenes.
I had quite a few favourite scenes. Some of them really, really made me laugh, but then others were just so cheesy and cliche that I couldn't even write them down because I'm just like, that's just way too fucking obvious. The first one is a Bobo looking in the book. They are trying to convince to escape from the army. They've got to climb inside some coffins and pretend to be dead. And a Bobo is just too childlike and too afraid to really do this. So Jesse has this little silver book that his father had given him, and he gets a Bobo to look into the reflection and says to him that if you keep staring in it, it's good luck. And a Bobo's like, I can't see anything, Jesse. I can't see. And Jesse smacks him in the back of the head with a shotgun and knocks him out. I was just like, well, that's kind of like a Mr. T moment from the A-Team. Here, drink this milk. You'll sleep through the airplane.
The film is sprinkled with light elements of comedy and humour. When you find yourself laughing, and that's why I say it. It fishtails between fantasy and back to reality again.
I really liked the scene in the I think it's the brothel just before Father Time and Little Jay come back, and it's where you've got Wheezy, a Bobo, and Angel all kind of messing around inside the room. It just kind of looked really nice camaraderie. Either they were friends off set and they brought it onto set, or they just got used to it. And then obviously you've got Father Time turning up with Little J, them having their little deal. Then the guys from the table that they've stolen from, they turn up, and then they get shot in the back by the Colonel. So everybody's got to fucking escape, and it just turns into a mad rush out of New Orleans. I thought that was fun. My final favourite scenes are kind of the last fight sequence. Merrill Van Peebles is turned up at the saloon, and him and the Colonel are having this fight, and the Colonel is swinging around this blazing piece of wood. Now, I had to slow down the film and rewind it a couple of times to make this, but the continuity is fucking terrible because either Billy Zane couldn't see during the fight and had to move his eye patch, or they thought it would be a good idea to move the eye patch to see if anybody noticed. I noticed the fact that he's swinging it and it's over his eye. Then it cuts to Mara Van Peebles, and when it cuts back, it's halfway up his forehead, and you've got two eyes looking at you, and you're like, hang on a minute, he was shot in the eye at the beginning of the film, that's not right. And then the final fight where Billy Zane has finally been impaled on this sword, and Jesse Lee has left him to die. He grabs the Indian girl, pulls outside of the saloon, they're walking up the road. Billy Zane has pulled himself off the sword and comes walking out on fire. Jesse Lee turns around, shoots him in the stomach. The Colonel falls back through the doors, and the whole fucking saloon just explodes. It was just, you want your big villain to explode at the end.
Yeah, I think it's probably one of the best Billy Zane deaths actually in film. So
yeah.
I can only somewhat recommend this film as a curiosity piece. It does deserve respect for at least trying to tell this story, because it woke me up. It made me go, wait a minute, why was I brainwashed why did I not realise that more than a third of all cowboys were African American men that were slaves or were forced into this labour that just broke free of their restraints and just, rode the land like other cowboys.
Yeah.
So props to trying to tell that story, because, they fished this film around and Hollywood rejected it. They just went, no, this is not something we're going to do. And it was Gramercy Pictures, I think, that eventually decided to pick up the film and make it. And it's been said that a lot of the actors went out of pocket in order to make sure the film got made, because the budget wasn't there.
Yeah.
And they all felt like this story needed to be told. So the actors themselves went out of pocket to see it made. And I also kind of think it's interesting that Gramercy Pictures doesn't exist anymore. They kind of merged with another company and eventually formed Focus Pictures. And Focus Pictures' biggest film was Brokeback Mountain. Gay cowboys. So I kind of thought that was an interesting thread anyway. But yeah, the film has some great visuals. It has some colourful characters that are not too well explored. It does dwell in mediocrity so much during the middle part of the film. The flashbacks were terrible. The love interest was terrible. Not enough time spent with the posse. Endless montages. Fishtailing between, like I said, fantasy and reality, to trying to tell something historically meaningful jumping between these crazy scenarios. And you know, right up to the end of the film, when it jumps like 50, 60 years later, and you've got an old man telling the story and passing on the silver book at the end, and you're like, well, where's this come from? Like, what meaning does this have? It's like, okay, so it's like the story lives on, like the story of Jesse.
I think the little boy at the end who gives the guns to Jesse and Jesse gives him the book.
That is him.
That's the guy who's obviously
but
grown
what's
up
the
now.
point in having that scene at the end?
I got really confused because we've just sat through the whole film. I don't believe that old man who was the little boy knew everything that led up to Jesse coming back to town.
Exactly.
Unless Jesse told him and he decided to write it down.
But then after that, we get to like full screen text crawls about the real history, which again is fascinating.
Yes.
And I was like, but this is not what the film was about.
No.
So why the fuck is this tacked in at the end? And which is all historically fact inaccurate. But then the film jumps for its end credits into a stupid rap song.
Oh yeah.
So I was just like, so you've gone from this to this and then to that and so within like 3 minutes I can completely tell you how the film just jumps so crazily from what it's trying to do. And so I recommend it as a curiosity piece, and if you want something different from the conventional, well, it's the exact same Western film you've seen 1,000 times, but just this time with African-American black actors in those roles. So, otherwise, it's a bland, average Western film, and on those merits, I wouldn't recommend it. But because there's other things going on around it, it doesn't make it a better film, but it does make it interesting in that regard.
Okay. I only recommend this if you are, like Gary said, if you're looking for something different than the old traditional Westerns. It's nowhere as good as some of those classics. You know, there are some really good Westerns out there, and Posse does try to do something different. It just fails to actually deliver anything different. You know, you can sit there with a checklist and tick off every single thing that this film does to copy other Western movies. It's one of those films that if you're that you could find randomly on a TV channel. You know, you have nothing to watch and it's there on BBC One or TCM or Film 4 at 2 o'clock in the morning, or any of those random ass channels. And if you're switching off your brain, you'll probably just go through it and find a lot of the jokes funny and some of the acting really, really good. But there's no risk to Jesse Lee. Mario Van Peebles is pretty much wearing plot armor all the way through this. And so you kind of, you wait for him to turn up to beat the bad guys. And then when he does, you're kind of like, really? Is that it? I mean,
it's just a missed opportunity. Like I said, they had Isaac Hayes in here. Does really nothing.
Yeah.
You had Pam Grier.
Oh, Pam Grier. Yeah.
Did she have any
I think
dialogue?
she fires like one bullet in the fight sequence.
It's
and
just
then
a wasted opportunity.
But at the same time, you know, we are talking low budget. We are talking the actors having to be out of pocket to at least just get the film completed. Hollywood probably fucking around from the background and stuff like that. So it's credit that this film ever got made or ever got released. So on those merits alone, yes, you should go and watch it. Do not expect anything amazing. But, you know, fuck it. It's better than Tekken 2.
Thanks for watching Off the Shelf Reviews.
Billy the Kid was a well-known villain, but I know a black villain that did more killing. Dismissed from the Western movies and TV. Cherokee blood, spilling blood, killing them easy. The final frontier adds another test for slaves and Indians headed towards the west. Another showdown, so don't put your gun away. You start shooting like your name was Doc Holliday. So it's safe to say real men walk black.